Hello everyone, my name's Justin Prince, and welcome to episode 4 of my NBA 2K77 MyLeague. We look to become one of the greatest dynasties of the 1970s and 80s. We enter today's episode at a very poor 8-12, the worst record in the NBA, coming into this episode. And that triggered me to decide it's time to make some trades. Leonard Gray was the perfect prospect to trade. With 9 points per game entering the episode and 5.6 rebounds, we weren't likely going to sign him in the offseason. He is on an expiring deal, so we traded him and Norton Barnhill for Jim Brewer and Roland Garrett. Jim Brewer entered the episode with 15.6 points per game and 12.3 rebounds for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So that also in turn got us some extra cap space even with the extra contract for next season. We started securing victories against teams like the Kansas City Kings and the Denver Nuggets afterwards. We beat the Kings in overtime, for example, 107-103. We entered our first play-in game 12-15, as we'll take on the 14-13 Phoenix Suns at home. And the fans packed the stands for this one in what was expected to be a very difficult matchup against two teams who are very much so struggling this season. Things would start chaotically though, as Fred Brown would start with a posterizing slam dunk over Alvin Adams. Then, moments later, this would emphasize how crazy this first quarter got. Tom Van Arsdale would miss the layup down low on the fast break. Then we'd respond with the fast break our own, finding Mike Green, who was making the start at center. He couldn't make the layup either. Then Alvin Adams would drive right by Fred Brown for the easy right-hand layup. Alvin Adams finished with 27 points, 15 rebounds on the day. Moments later, Fred Brown baseline jump shot would go. He started off very cold in a lot of these games we've seen so far, especially when it comes to jump shots, for someone known as Downtown Brown. Moments later, though, we would start to pull away a little bit as Green would slam down the ball and give us a lead by as much as 6 before Phoenix responded with a run over the course of a minute. They would respond with Butch Fair getting a layup inside. They would lead 27-25 after one. Then the N1s would start coming. In the second quarter, Tom Burleson would draw the N1. Then moments later, Bob Wilkerson would draw one of his own, making contact on the layup to bring the lead up to 6. Moments later, now leading by 10, momentum continued as Wilkerson would lead the charge and find Jim Brewer, who would get an N1 of his own. Jim Brewer picked up 20 points, 11 rebounds, making a start in this matchup for Mike Bantam. We led 65-55 after 2. Then, things started to get a little bit more Phoenix Sunsy in the third quarter, to say the least. Paul Westphal would lead the fast break after the steal and bring the lead to single digits. Then moments later, Phoenix would tie things back up with a fast break. Tom Van Arsdale would lay it up over top Slick Watts to tie it up at 69. As you may have seen, 70% shooting for Phoenix in the third quarter at about halfway through the frame. Moments later, though, Dennis Johnson would get the layup inside, which were back and forth in the closing stages of the third. Westphal would respond with a right-hand layup of his own. Phoenix trailed 89-88 to Seattle after 3. The back and forth would continue to start off the fourth quarter as Westphal would get the steal and put it in for the layup. Moments later, now Suns up by 4, Watts would get the steal of his own, finding Jim Brewer, who would clean up his own mess and put in the ball to bring the Seattle SuperSonics within 2. However, the Suns would get the last laugh as they would start picking up momentum. Just after a timeout with 7 minutes remaining, it would be Paul Westphal who would start scoring bucket after bucket, putting up the jump shot over Watts first. Then, minutes later, under 5 minutes to go, now leading 115-99, quickly cutting in for 2 more points. He finished with 42 points, 6 assists, and 4 steals on the night, and a majority of them came in the fourth. In the end, 133-110 was the final. I really thought at the time that this was the opportunity to win a user game for us. In the end, it just wasn't meant to be, especially as you can see, we struggled in some cases, but in the end, when Westphal and Adams really started to heat up, we just couldn't keep up. They shot 46%, 52 for 112, and as you can see, 14 steals picked up on the night for Phoenix. The simulation continued afterwards, and as you can see, against the best of the best teams, it's a struggle. Bob McAdoo, for example, put up a season-high 56 points over us, where we were held to just 67 points. But I picked up on something after the next grouping of games as we approached the halfway point of the season. Despite some injuries, and despite playing some expansion teams, we were able to beat organizations like the Houston Rockets and Los Angeles Lakers. For example, we beat the Rockets 95-78, despite only having a leading score of 17 points. So, my thought process was, why not play the Rockets since they're also in the conversation for one of the last picks in this year's draft? Now, coming into this matchup, I thought there was a great chance to win. And boy oh boy, did this become a wild game. You'll see why throughout this. Calvin Murphy and Mike Newland both started off fairly dominant. They're two of the top scorers for the Houston Rockets. Newland 12 points per game, Murphy 23.5 entering the matchup. And they were both red hot early. Houston led by as much as 10 as we struggled to pass the ball early on. Eventually we woke up with 5 minutes to go in the first as Dennis Johnson would slam it down. Then moments later, Fred Brown would get the steal and find Tom Burleson on the break. He would miss the first opportunity, but get the second down low to bring us within 1. Then, minutes later, trailing by 3 once more, it would be Jim Brewer who would get the layup and cap off a 13-4 run. We would finally take the lead within the final 10 seconds of the quarter, where Brown would find Burleson down low for the quick leading jumper from about 5 feet. 40-39 was the score after 1. The back and forth affair continued for much of the second with us getting the momentum. Slick Watts would get the layup, then moments later Watts would go on the fast break and find his way to Mike Bantam, who would get a mismatch with Murphy down low to get the post hook that would give Seattle a 4-point lead. The momentum started to change after that, as Mike Green would get the ball down low and despite the double team, make the post move over top Murphy. Then, moments later, after a bad pass led to an interception, it would be Green who would run the full length of the court and get a block on John Johnson. It was one of 12 first-half blocks for the SuperSonics. Seattle led 76-70 at halftime. The momentum started to shift towards Seattle's direction once more in the third quarter. As Slick Watts would lead the charge, he'd get the screen from Green and go right on in for 2 of his 26 points. Moments later, Brown, he'd get a chance for a jump shot, but it'd be Green who would be right there to pick up the pieces and quickly score 2 of his 22 points. Moments later, Calvin Murphy, he'd get rejected by Green once more and set up the fast break for Seattle. It'd find its way to Bantam for another stop. Every single Seattle player finished in double-digit points in this matchup, and the SuperSonics led by as much as 20 points, but then around came the Rockets. Murphy would drive right on in and bring it to a 10-point game. Houston would trail by 9 after 3. Then moments later, Murphy would shed multiple defenders, and even with the Burleson block, would set up Tom Owens for the second chance putback. Moments later, Connor would get the right-hand hook and tie the game up at 110. Then, remember the N1s from Phoenix that we were able to pick up with Seattle. They started to come in full force for the Rockets. Tom Janovich would find Newland on the fast break. He'd score 2 of his 37 points and complete the N1. Moments later, after the missed jump shot from Brown, Rudy Tomjanovich would once again get the rebound, lead the fast break, finding his way to Newland once more down low for another quick 2. Calvin Murphy, meanwhile, was red hot, especially in the fourth. He'd come away with 50 points in the ball game as the Rockets come away with the victory. 150-140, the final. And boy, did this one hurt. Look at the stat line, 55% shooting, and we still don't win the ball game. 10 steals, a whopping 22 blocks. In the end, it was the charity stripe that ended up being the major difference with 30 made free throws for the Rockets. Among the other notables is Connor picked up 16 points and 13 rebounds in the ball game, while Ratliff also picked up 15 points. Tom Janovich was ice cold, 4 for 14, just 10 points. And as mentioned, every single player who played in the game scored double-digit points. How often does that happen? And that even came with Bruce Seals picking up 10 points in the fourth quarter alone. It was an incredible game, and only to lose by 10 in the end just left me flabbergasted and absolutely frustrated, to say the very least, afterwards. The main thought process, and I think you'd agree with me on this, is it's time to get sliders for this series, because with the Hall of Fame difficulty on default, we're getting scores that are unrealistic for the 1970s and 80s, and it's getting to where even when you perform well, it still doesn't end up being enough. With that, it's time to say goodbye. I'd like to thank you for tuning in for today's episode of my NBA 2K77 MyLeague. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening. See you next time.